So again, welcome to this training. This is going to be on accessibility. It's going to be an overview on what accessibility is, how we can incorporate accessibility in our projects. Today in our training, Fabi's going to be helping us out. She's going to be checking the chat. So if you have any questions, just type them into the chat. She'll read them out as we go through them through the presentation. Just please keep yourself on mute. If we call on you, yeah, you can unmute yourself. We can discuss stuff. And if you have any questions, just put them in the chat. And Eric Feldy, also from our team, is on standby if you have any questions for him. So just let us know in the chat. We're going to start off with the basic question: what is accessibility? Here at the agency, I think everybody kind of has an idea of what accessibility is. You know, what we're supposed to be doing and how it affects people. There's not really a set definition. Everybody's kind of got their own definition going on, but the concept's the same, right? And that's going to be the practice of providing access to all people. Now, when we look at this, it's really generic. It's really vague. It's not a lot of information we can go off. But from here, you know, we have to just analyze it a little bit more, and this is where I can explain to you, you know, what accessibility is and where it's coming from. So a key factor here is access. So when I mean access, they're meaning access to physical spaces, which falls under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And it's also talking about electronic and information technology, which is Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act. It was amended in 1998 to include, you know, what was going on with the internet, technology, advanced technology, and stuff like that. So that's what access means to accessibility: physical spaces and electronic and information technology. Now, all this needs to be accessible to who? And basically, that's the other factor of this definition. It's to the people. Who? Basically, everyone. Everybody that is using or needs access to somewhere, no matter, you know, if they have a disability or not, you know, that's what it basically means. It needs to be accessible or available to everybody. And, you know, we're very familiar with the physical spaces of accessibility. We see them every day in public places, at work. You know, you'll see ramps to buildings, parking spaces designated for handicap parking, and even restrooms are designed to accommodate people with wheelchairs. So this is very common. We see them every day. And that's the physical spaces. The electronic and information technology, which is the 508 section, that's kind of what we are going to focus this training on. And, you know, this is what we're going to focus the training on, and what we use it almost all the time here at TEA. Not that the ADA physical space is not important, but this training and what we're going to be doing for our content needs to fall under Section 508. So this focuses on what we call electronic information resources. Basically, that means anything that's electronic and resources. The accessibility part where it comes in is that it means this is where we ensure people with disabilities can access the same information and perform the same functions as anyone else. Section 508 is really, you know, broken down into two sections too. It's more of the electronic format and also the technology. So anything that's like a device, hardware. So it covers those two categories. But at TEA and for this training, we're focusing on the digital content, which is anything that is digital: websites, applications, forms, documents, PDFs, all kinds of documents. So that's kind of what we're focusing here on TA with accessibility. So why do we have to, have our digital content accessible? Well, there's a lot of rules and policies in place. So, it is TA's policy to follow, since we are a state agency, to follow TAC rules, the Texas Administrative Code. In there, there's Chapter 206 and 213, which focuses on websites, EIR, and anything digital for agencies that we need to comply with. Based on those rules, a lot of that is aligned with the Section 508, which is the federal standards. And then those Section 508 standards align with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, what we call WCAG. And currently, there's different levels. We just got to follow 2.0 level A. So, so we know what it is. We know why we have to do it. And when it comes to TEA, there's a lot of people all the time working on different projects. There's lots of content being produced, applications, forms, maybe a new website. All that needs to be accessible before it's published. So when it comes to accessibility at the agency, it shouldn't just rely on one person on the team doing that. It is a shared responsibility. That means everybody here at TEA needs to be able to comply with these policies and rules that we're making content EIR accessible. So that means staff and vendors who support or assist in creating, editing, sharing, reviewing, publishing. All these people, the whole team is kind of responsible for doing their part with accessibility. For staff, we really want to make sure they're making their content accessible before it's being published or before it's shared to other TA staff or other people external to TEA, maybe an ESC or a school district. So we need to make sure all that is accessible before it's being published or shared. Staff, the staff should be taking these accessibility training tutorials. There's a lot of guides that we can provide that helps you make your content accessible. And if you're working with a vendor, there's a contract or a vendor involved, all the stuff the vendor's producing, all the EIR, all the digital content, whatever it is, a website, maybe documents, a report, anything digital, it should be accessible. And of course, if you ever have questions or concerns about accessibility, you can always contact Web Services. We do have a resource site on ITA, but you can always reach out to us either to help desk ticket or through webadmin1@ta.texas.gov for more information or concerns. Vendors, when it comes to vendors, they need to be producing whatever they're providing for TA compliant to the WCAG 2.0 AA accessibility standards. That's what we need to produce here at TA. That's what we require from our staff to produce, and they should be matching that. When it comes to training for vendors, what we provide to the staff is based off our policies, our best practices, stuff that works for our agency. Might be a little different for their requirements. So, there's a lot of resources out there that has training from government sites, and there's also the courses are paid. The vendor should really acquire their own training so they can be accommodated to their needs. That's why we don't really want to provide that much training on what we use, even though it might help them. So it's better for them to get their own training. And if they have any questions, of course, they can reach us and we can, we can tell them, yeah, that might work, that might not work. And another big thing for vendors is, once they get contracts or statement of work, they should really review the requirements for accessibility. When they come on board, they should already know that this is a requirement. If they're going to be producing something that's going to be a EIR, some kind of document or website, anything like that, they should already kind of know it needs to be accessible. And then once they turn it in, so they need to know they need to make it accessible. They need to make it accessible, and when they turn it in, it needs to be kind of tested and verified. There's usually language in the contracts that say, hey, you're producing a website, we need it accessible, we need it checked by a third party, and those kind of requirements. So they need to be very aware of those requirements. Sometimes, depending on what it is that they're producing for us, we might need it to be tested and verified through a VPAT or ACR, so we can know it's been tested and it's accessible. Any questions so far? All right. If you still have questions, just put them in the chat and we'll get back to them. So we know what we have to do, what the vendors have to do. So what content really needs to be accessible? I like to think of our content as internal content. One of two categories. One of them is an internal content. That's anything that's created by TEA staff and vendors, published on our websites or online platforms, and shared among internal or external users. That needs to be accessible. So even if it's technically, you're sharing a Word doc with one coworker, it technically needs to be accessible. And I know that doesn't happen all the time and there's no way to checking that, but just to let you know that technically needs to be accessible. Sometimes we're in a rush, we need to send something to our coworker and we put all the information in there and send it off. And, that works for what you're doing, but, it's always good and it's going to help everybody to do this as a habit. Like, okay, so here's my document. Let me put some headings to it. Let me make sure the link is descriptive enough. Let me make sure the background color is good with the foreground text color. It might not matter to the person you're sending it to, but it's just good practice to do that. And whenever we need to do something like that for a public resource, it's easier for you if you're practicing this to make it accessible. So just keep that in mind. Internal content needs to be accessible. The other category, we kind of have external content. So what is external content? I think of it like content that is created by maybe another agency or organization, and they produce it, they create it, and we need a link to it. It's a resource we can use, so we link to it. And this usually, is something we have no control of because they created it, but we need to use it. So when that happens, the best practice is to link to it. So if they have it on their website as well, it's better to just link directly to the source instead of uploading it to our servers and then linking it that way on our web page. So just keep that in mind. If something's being, is there some kind of collaboration with other agencies? They're creating the document. It'd probably be best if they upload it and then we can link to it. You might be asking why. Well, when we do that, when we link to it instead of upload it on our end, we're saving storage space, which might not be that much, but it stores a little bit on the storage. The other thing is that we don't have to maintain it. So if someone updates that information and we're linking to it, they updated it, it should link to the latest information. So that way there's no maintenance on our end. And there's also no accessibility obligation on our end either, because it's linked to another website. It's not on our website. So, you know, if someone says, hey, I need this accessible, and they complain to us about it, we can just say, hey, it's a third party resource. We can contact them. We can see what they can do. And so that's the benefit of always linking to resources that are not ours. It's better to just link to them directly at their source. But a lot of times they're like, no, this is not uploaded on their website. It was just produced for us, and here it is. If that's the case, you really want to get back with the vendor or the other organization doing this and see if they can produce an accessible version. A lot of times, you know, it doesn't get done. So then we have to upload it on our websites. And if that's the case, then we have to do it. Then we have to do it to get the information out there to the public. But we're gonna then have to kind of take ownership of it since it's on our website now. And the owner needs to work on getting that accessible. So it is, you know, anything that's produced and published on our website needs to be accessible.
Johnny, we have two questions.
Okay.
So the first one is from Tebby. She's asking, are grantees considered the same as vendors when it comes to obtaining their own 508 training?
So trustees like you, ESCs?
Grantees. So
Grantees.
like if there's a grant that was given to them.
Right. So there, you know, the beginning of last year, we worked on a lot of language updates, and terms and conditions were updated, and also information, these kind of requirements for grantees. So there is something in that requirements, guidelines for grantees that mentions accessibility and needs to be accessible.
Thank you, Tony. And the next question says, is accessibility a standard clause on contracts with vendors? Is it always in there, or is it something that needs to be added?
Pretty much it's already in there. Every time there's a contract, there's the terms and conditions, and accessibility, and along with a lot of other stuff is already in those kind of documents and requirements for vendors. So the thing is with accessibility, with these requirements, is sometimes is we know it's specific to maybe a website or a report. You know, the people working producing the RFPs or these kind of solicitations, they kind of put accessibility in there, you know, under a deliverable or a scope of work. And some other people might just leave it in the terms and conditions. So I think at one point we're going to have to get something in there that, you know, yeah, everything needs to be accessible so vendors can see it up front. But it should be in all kinds of solicitations. All right. Any more questions so far?
So far, that's it.
All right.
Oh,
So,
wait, we just got one.
okay.
Oh, so the question for the grantees was about training for the grantee. So are grantees, um, like vendors or contracts, responsible for obtaining their own training?
Pretty much, yes. So, we're gonna, we say what we need is WCAG 2.0 AA requirements, and there's training out there that they can obtain on the web. There's a lot of free training from government websites and other paid courses. Um, the best we can do is kind of guide them on what our standards are, what we expect, and it might give them clues on how to fix some issues. Right now, we are working on a page that is going to be guidelines. So it's going to start off at guidelines, and we'll see where it goes from there. But for now, yeah, they should acquire their own training. Sometimes there are special circumstances that and this has happened in the past where they're working on something really urgent, important, and they reach out to us and they get some kind of training for what they're working on. So it just depends, but overall they should acquire their own training. That way, they know what they need and they can acquire it for maybe 5 persons or 100 persons, depending on who's working on this stuff. All right, so plan for accessibility. So this is really important because a lot of projects start off as something we're working on as a group. So there's always a lot of people involved. It might start off with one or two people setting up the outline. It moves on to another group. They input their information. Maybe it goes to a subject matter expert. They refine it. Then it goes for approval. It might be between 1, 3 people or more. So by the time you realize that, a document, and I'm using a document as an example, or a PowerPoint, it just starts off as one person working on it, and by the time it's finished, published, finalized, maybe 6 to 8 people or more have worked on it, touched it, reviewed it. So when it comes to working on content, you need to ensure accessibility is incorporated, by all the contributors in all the phases of that content creation, in the planning, the creation, and in the implementation. So for planning, these are some things you might just want to think about, like first of all, discuss, hey, we're going to start this report, we need it to be accessible. Something just saying, hey, we need to focus and making sure it's accessible to all the content creators or contributors. That just says, yeah, we're putting accessibility as a priority for this project or for this content. Establish a plan to integrate the requirements, designs, colors, layouts to use best accessible practices. So what that means is, let's say there is a report and you're going to put a table with data. So a lot of times, the table should be the data should be in a table, but sometimes, someone might want to add more information to it, add more data, another data set, and then that kind of, affects the accessibility on that table. So, if you're going to have multiple sets of data on a table, you might want to just think about that and make sure that every set of data is on its own little table. That makes it accessible for screen readers. Again, if you're designing something that has a lot of color, just think about the color, think about what you're using, stuff like that. A layout, make sure it's a nice clean layout. It doesn't have lots of columns where screen reader can go from one end to another end and skip a section or read it out of order. So these are kind of things you gotta want to plan before you start creating your content. And I know sometimes content just comes as it's needed, but if that's the case, you still need to kind of think about it and say, is this the right way to incorporate this new content into the document, and then see there's ways we can make it more accessible by following the best practices. Sometimes you have an idea of what you want, but it might not be accessible. Let's say you're working on a website, you want maybe a drop down or something, or some kind of search feature, and that is not really accessible. So this is more if you're working on complex components or elements, like on a website, drop downs, menu, drop down menu, stuff like that. So things like that, you might want to just consider, it's like, hey, if I can't make that work, we need to come up with a plan that's going to be accessible and fulfill our needs. Now, so this is the planning part. When you start working on it, everybody might be putting in, contributing at different parts, but everyone should be supporting accessibility and doing their part. So if someone just has a role of reviewing content, they should check it for accessibility. What they got, what they maybe added is accessible. And they should be, everybody should be while they're working on their piece, they should also be checking accessibility, making sure everything is kind of aligned to the best standards, is being accessible. And if you get stuck, if anybody gets stuck, always reach out to maybe someone else on your team that might have more knowledge on accessibility, or the web services team. We're always available. There's a help desk ticket system. You can contact us, and we have an email, so you can always contact us and ask us, or let us know if there's any issues going on while you're working on this. It's better to get notified before or during the creation than at the end when it needs to be published, that evening or something, and there's no time to really make the adjustment. So the better, the more sooner you're able to identify issues, ask for help to get those resolved. Now, then implementation or before implementation, right when it's ready to be finalized, I would just suggest maybe having one or two of these contributors that help during the project to review it for accessibility. Now, it shouldn't be complex because everybody should have been doing their part on accessibility. So when these people get it and they do their individual checks, it shouldn't have any issues or have minor issues. Usually what happens, and I've seen this done with a lot of documents here at TEA, is they come through and they get created, they get approved, reviewed, and then at the end, it comes down to the content manager that needs to upload it to the website. And once they upload it, we get notified to check it for accessibility, and we start saying this can't be published because it's not accessible. These are the issues with it. And usually it stays with the content manager to update and fix a lot of the accessibility issues. That kind of takes away a lot from the content managers, because now they have to focus a lot of time getting that accessible, trying to meet deadlines. Again, if everybody did their part, accessibility shouldn't be a big thing to fix. And then, make sure, when you're doing these, and the last step is review, the check, G6, you have accessibility checkers content checkers, color contrast checkers, any tools that checks for accessibility, use them. Those are going to be good tools. The thing with the tools is that it doesn't catch everything. So you still got to use the tools and do manual checks. And make sure everything is tested to ensure that it's compatible, usable, and accessible. When I mean, usable, is it really working? It might be accessible where I'm able to use my keyboard to get to everything, but when I hit enter, is it really doing what it's supposed to do when I get to a certain section? Compatible, I know that when it comes to compatibility, you make sure you're checking it on the modern browsers. So anything that's Chrome, Firefox, if you're able to check it on Safari, those are great ways to check if your content is working on all those three browsers. IE, not that much anymore. It's already discontinued, but there's also Edge. So you might want to test it in Edge too. So now, when you're working on an actual document, you want to focus on the principles, right? So these are what the WCAG kind of categorizes a lot of the requirements. The information needs to be perceivable. If it's a link, make sure it looks like a link. Anything that's an image, make sure there's some alt text behind it. It needs to be operable. So if it's a link, you get to it, make sure when it's executed, it works, it takes you somewhere. All the information needs to be understandable. So try to keep your content, very clear. There's a lot of different writing techniques, but and sometimes it's kind of hard because on our web pages, maybe you need to put information that uses certain words, certain terminology, written a certain way, and it takes away from being easy to read. So if that's the case, that's not much we can do for now. But everything else, maybe a link to it is very clear and cut like what it is. Navigation, you don't want to have something that says accessibility principles, people click on it, and it might just be not accessibility principles, it might be something else, so everything that's understandable, it's going to make people really understand and get your content and read it really easy. And it should be robust. So what you're doing for, you don't really, for documents, this is good, but it's not really meant for documents, meant more for like applications and websites. A document, if we're using Microsoft, Microsoft's going to be producing the latest tools and updates to make it accessible as much as possible if you're doing your part. So this is more for web pages and applications. Make sure whatever you're doing to it is going to be compatible in the future. There's an update and it stays accessible. That's very generic, but when it comes down to what it all means, it's basically breaking it down into certain categories, right? Like color. Two things about color. When you're working with color, make sure that there's enough color contrast. There needs to be enough between any text and a background. If you're using a blue background with a gray text, that's not going to be accessible, and it's going to cause issues for people that have colorblind issues. You want to get something that's really there's enough contrast, and sometimes we don't need a checker to just see that that's not too good, but sometimes we do need a checker. I'm going to send out a list of all the tools we have that you can use a checker and more resources. But make sure when it comes to color, there's enough contrast between the background and the foreground. Now, sometimes the background, you might not put a background color, you leave it on the white. So that is considered background. So if you're putting gray on white, it might not be accessible. So that is considered a background color, the white original of a document. Also with color information, any color with information is something to be aware of. You know, you can't convey information solely on color. The thing is that assistive technologies, like screen readers, they can't distinguish color. And it's also going to affect people with colorblind issues. So if you do have a list that says, this is kind of what my list is, I'm going to shade this first row red because that means this, and this other one a yellow because it means that. It's not going to be really accessible. You have to add maybe a label, some more information to know what that color is. And if a colorblind person has issues with those colors, when they see it and they have that extra information, they'll be able to kind of comprehend what the shade is or what that line is for. With tables, you shouldn't be using tables for a layout. Sometimes you see layouts, it makes it look really uniform. That's really the very old way of formatting documents and web pages with tables. Screen readers are going to have trouble just coming in here and trying to read everything in the correct order. So for tables, you really want to use it for data. So, and another issue that I see is you shouldn't merge or leave cells blank. So over here we can see one cell that is merged. And a lot of times, you know, when you start having merged cells, these are called complex tables because, you know, there's data that's trying to support 2 rows or 2 columns. And a screen reader, most of the time, will have issues getting to all the headers and everything else because there's so much merging or maybe going on that it might skip something. In this case, it's probably going to miss that second row there because it's reading the first row, then it's going to read plan quality, and it's going to read 1, and then it's going to read the description, and then it might skip that second one because if it goes back to plan quality, it kind of knows, like, I already read this, I'm going to skip on to the next row. So it's very hard to say yes or no because screen readers, people use different screen readers. People have screen readers configured different ways. So just keep that in mind when you're working with tables. You don't want to really merge tables or have blank cells. You're supposed to have table headers too. That's very important. At the top over here in this example, it's very good. They have what the goal is, and everything underneath it should be what the goal is. The title, everything underneath that is the title and the description. So that should always be the first top row. Sometimes you can use the left column as a header too, you know, especially if you need to make that connection between what the plan quality is for a certain description. Screen readers are able to reference the top row and the left column and make that connection to the user. Don't add table titles to the first row. Sometimes people want to add a title to the table and they use that first row. Remember, that first row is designated for a table header. So if it's a title for the table, you want to put that outside the table. maybe tag it as a heading and then the table right below it. Don't incorporate that title in the table. And then sometimes there's merging of table headers, and you don't want to do that either. That's just going to mess up the reference for certain data to the user. So the best thing to do here is use simple tables. So if you ever, think, putting a one table with two data sets on one table makes it better. It might, for visual reference, it might make it better and more understandable. But when it comes to screen readers, people with assistive technologies, it might not work the same for them. So you really want to just separate all the table sets and make them into their own table. And always remember that tables are read left to right, top to bottom. So they'll read row by row, left to right, from top to bottom. Charts. Important thing to know about charts is whatever information the chart is giving you, you want to convey all that information somehow. So if it's a very small chart and you can convey the information in 100 characters or less, you can add alt text to that chart. Lots of screen readers, after 100 characters, they just stop and move on to the next content. So if you have, 10 years of data here and you're trying to explain what it is and it's over 100 characters, it's going to stop at 100 and move on. Again, this is different for every content screen reader, for every user. They might configure it different, but on average, 100 characters it should be the limit for alt text. So if you can't add it as alt text, you want to incorporate the data and information somehow in the content. So maybe this is a report. There's some text above it explaining what this is. If it's already in there, if it's already explained in the content, you're basically set. You don't have to worry about the chart. All you have to do now is make sure that chart is marked as decorative, so the screen reader can pass it and move on to the next content because they already kind of read the information. So for the visual people, the chart's there. For screen readers, the chart's been explained. And sometimes, there's not it's not explained and it's over 100 characters. So what do you do then? The best thing to do is write it out, provide like what you would do on a text summary, but don't add it as a text summary. Just do it as what you might do for alt text, but don't do it as alt text, just as a text summary. And a lot of times, if you're working with a Word document, you can place that content behind the image of the chart. So that way, when the screen reader reads and it gets the chart, it'll read all that information you type and that's behind the chart, and you're set, and then make that chart stay there for the visual users and make it descriptive or decorative. So there's different ways to incorporate all that information from charts into your content. But that's key. Everything that you're providing in a chart, you should have it in the text equivalent for screen readers. Use color correctly. Make sure you're using if you're using a bar chart, pie chart, make sure the colors, if there's labels inside, that's pie chart, 5%, whatever. Make sure there's enough contrast between the chart, the pie chart color, background colors, and the labels. Don't use the same colors. If you have a blue for 20%, and then when it gets to 5%, another blue, or 15%, it might be hard to distinguish for colorblind users. And sometimes you can use patterns in the graph. So a line bar like this, You could put, there's ways you could maybe incorporate a pattern. That might help too, depending on how much data you have. So a pattern is basically, instead of a solid bar, you might get like what you call like a hatch or a cross hatch version design instead of a solid. So that might be something that might work for some charts. And use the correct reading order. So if you're putting your alt text, make sure you're writing it in a logical order. So, you know, you want to start either from 2016, like in this example of a chart with 4 years, you want to start with explaining, conveying your information from 2016, then 2017 and 2018, and then 2019. You don't want to have data go either in alt text or in the content be everywhere. It needs to kind of be in a logical order. This way, anybody with cognitive disabilities, they can understand the information better. Maybe using a pie chart, make sure the chart or the information is read in clockwise order. That's kind of standard. Links. Links need to be descriptive. They need to make sense when read out of context. And it's always better to use a phrase rather than a single word. If you take something away from this training today, it'll be to never use here, click here, more, something this generic for a link. That is really very problematic for screen readers, you know, because it's for them, it's here, click here, more. It's not really descriptive. They don't know what is behind there unless they read parts of the context. So here are some examples of unclear text examples. Like you can see, register for TA webinars, click here, learn more about TA websites, color, contrast, accessibility standards here, more, register. So this is what you don't want to do with your content. You want to put them more in a descriptive format or descriptive link text. Instead of just click here, you might want to just make TA webinar registration as one link. Instead of here or click here, you know, you want to incorporate TA color contrast standards. So you can see here, this is more descriptive. It's a phrase more than a single word. So you might be thinking like, what does it really matter if there's text behind it already leading up to what the link is? Yes, because screen readers have the ability to list out their links just to hear out what the link is. And sometimes they do this because they want to get certain sections of a content or just get to the main link of what that document is. So for them, they could just say, you know what, I want to just list out all the links and hear them out. And what they'll do is they have controls where the screen reader starts just reading all the links. So if you just have unclear link text, they're going to hear just click here, here, more, register. They don't really know what it is for. And on the other hand, if you have descriptive links, they'll be hearing TA webinar registration. They know what that is. TA color contrast standards. They don't know what that is. That link's for upcoming facility updates. They'll hear this instead of here, more, register. So that's going to help them get to the right information. Something that's been very popular in the past 2 years or so is online meetings. So what we can do to help with accessibility is they should be options to do captioning. The captioning, you know, is going to help when you turn on or when they turn on captioning, the users, they will be able to understand what the meeting and webinar is about. I know on Teams, there is an option, but it only works for the person that turns it on. So, just it's, and they're probably if they're using this feature, they're probably familiar and they'll always turn it on. But sometimes it's good to just remind them, like, hey, if you need captioning, there is options available for that. There is on our accessibility site guidelines for webinar and online meetings. And I recommend everybody just going through that and just reading kind of the recommendations, the best practices, guidelines to make online meetings and webinar better accessible. And there's also information about captions and transcripts. Videos is also very popular now. We got to make sure every videos are accessible. So how do we know if a video is accessible? First and foremost, it needs to have captions, synchronized captions. So that way, the information, is there for people that need it as the video is going on. And the other key thing is to make sure that the player is accessible. So even if there's captions on the video, but the player is not accessible, it's not going to be very useful, especially for screen reader users. So what does that mean? So it must support closed captions. There is a button for it to be turned on. The buttons, once they get to the play buttons, those should be should be able to be operated with the keyboard, not just with a mouse. And for screen readers, that play button says play. It is properly labeled. And the other thing too is that control buttons and this player basically works on different browsers. So if it's going to be embedded on a web page, it needs to make sure Chrome, the major modern browsers support that player. So I'm going to play this video here. So it's going, and you probably don't hear what's going on. You see, what's going on, but you can't hear it. So this is a prime example of what a video is for maybe someone that's deaf or hard of hearing. They'll see pictures, they'll see the video, people moving around, and they don't understand or know what the person's saying. But fortunately, there's captions at the bottom, so this way we can follow along and listen to Christine here, or she's cooking. There's a caption down there that says 0 minutes sound output. Good morning, this is Wendell. Can I help you? Hi, Wendell. So you can tell she's having a conversation on her phone. So this is a prime example of why captions are important. A person that might not be able to hear, they'll see pictures, they might not even comprehend what the video is about. So captions is going to give them that ability to understand, comprehend, participate, everything that a person that can hear, the same ability. And all right, so accessibility helps everyone. So, it's best practice to make everything accessible, everything, everything that's have everything well organized, navigations, layouts, the information is understandable, easy to read, interfaces are easy to use. That's going to help the an accessibility for people with disabilities, but overall it helps everyone, so it's not just helping people that need it or need those accommodations, but it's going to help everyone when it comes to websites, designs, navigation. Making it simple is going to help maybe someone that's looking for certain information get to that information faster. When it comes to content, someone that uses text size and spacing and font colors very well in their content is going to make it easy for screen readers to get to information and visual people to read that information maybe a little bit easier. Presentations, graphs with summaries. Maybe I have a graph and I see it, you know, but maybe I don't understand it. But if I have some kind of a summary next to it, it's kind of explaining what it is, that might make it more comprehensive. Color contrast, background color. So what you're doing with accessibility, enhancing documents, enhancing EIR, is benefiting everyone. There are exceptions. You know, sometimes we do have EIR that is not accessible and it needs to be published. So when we come to those situations, we have exceptions for them. That means we know about the issue, we've worked on the issue, and making that EIR accessible poses a significant difficulty or expense. So just keep that in mind, difficulty or expense. If the remediation can be done, but it might take a long time, those really don't fall into exception, you know, that doesn't fall into something that is going to have an exception for. Sometimes there's a document that might be 20, 30 pages. There's a lot of things that needs to be done to it. That's going to take a long time, but it's easy. It's something that's easy to do. You know, so probably that document didn't follow the plan of starting with accessibility, keeping accessibility in mind, having all the content contributors contribute to their accessibility when they're doing their portions, and it got to the point where it got that difficult to make accessible, or that not difficult, but so much time to make it accessible. So keep that in mind. So that's why you got to really plan accessibility as you work on your content, so it doesn't come to that where it's like, oh, I need to post this by 12, but it's not accessible, and it's going to take maybe a whole day or a few hours to get all this updated to be accessible. A lot of content that we create can be done, especially we're working with our native tools of Word, PowerPoint, can be done to be accessible and doesn't have to be come to this point where it needs to be an exception. So if you are granted an exception, those are usually for 12 months. But during those 12 months, it's not just, okay, we have it, there it is. You know, if you do have your ER that needs an exemption, you know, it should be the time to look in fixing what needs to be fixed, or maybe even finding another solution that's accessible. And then the thing is with exceptions is that we know about it, you know, it's our intent to make them work accessible. But if someone says, you know, I need that information, even accepted content must be made available in an accessible format upon request. So if a public user needs that information, you know, we need to find a way to accommodate that user and provide that inaccessible content in an accessible format. So just keep that in mind. You know, it doesn't mean like, there it is, we don't have to do it or deal with accessibility. If we do get a request, it is our responsibility to make that accessible. If you have more questions about exceptions or anything else, just email us at webadmin1@ta.texas.gov. What's the feature for? It's already 11. I'm just going to wrap this up really quick. The feature of accessibility at TEA, well, everything now is virtual. It's a digital workplace now. Everything's virtual meetings, online, libraries. So that means more digital content, more accessibility needs to be applied to those digital content. Right now, we're at 2.0, which was published in 2008. But there's been updates to the WCAG versions. There's 2.1 published in 2018, and 2.2 is coming up this summer. So what does that mean for us? So right now, nothing. We just have to make sure everything's compliant to 2.0 AA standards. But in the future, we might be required to go to 2.1 or 2.2, or move up from AA to AAA. The thing is with those is that if we're already following a set guidelines, doesn't mean we have to change everything. It just means there's more requirements going to be added to what we need to do. You know, maybe color needs to be a certain higher contrast ratio now. You know, it just depends what the requirement is. So it doesn't mean we have to start from scratch. It just means we got to just do a little bit more if that's the case. And resources, we have our accessibility resource site on ITEA, and here's a list of some of the upcoming trainings on accessibility. Next month, we're going to focus on PowerPoints, presentations, what to do, how to get them accessible, techniques, and more of the stuff with that. So make sure you tell your coworkers, other people about the training so we can spread this training and techniques throughout the agency as much as possible. All right. If you have any questions, put them in the chat. Remember, keep accessibility in mind as you work with your projects. And thank you for joining today's training.
Thank you, Tony. We have some questions, but one of them had to drop off to go to another meeting. I can follow up with her individually, but if you want to answer the other ones.
Sure, just give us all the questions, and we're gonna post this recording too on our site too, so maybe they can come back and we can follow up with them.
Okay, that sounds good. And will you share the PowerPoint presentation?
Yes.
All righty, then I think this is it. We'll follow up with everyone individually with your questions.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.